Today at the National Press Club, the European Union's ambassador to Australia, Gabriele Visentin. As Australia and the EU resume talks on a long-awaited free trade deal, the ambassador will outline Europe's vision to become a force for prosperity at a time of great global uncertainty. Gabriele Visentin with today's address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. I'm Andrew Tillett, Defence and Foreign Affairs Correspondent for the Australian Financial Review and also Vice President here at the club. Our guest today is the European Union Ambassador to Australia, Gabriele Visentin. Gabriele is a familiar and energetic face among the diplomatic corps here in Canberra after being posted to Australia in 2022. A career diplomat, he was already a regular visitor to this part of the world prior to his ambassadorship as the EU's Special Envoy to the Indo-Pacific. Australian-EU relations have been on an upwards trajectory in recent years. We're close to an elusive free trade agreement, while Brussels has also raised the prospect of a defence and security agreement with Australia. The drive for closer ties is coming amid as Donald Trump upends the global order and the authoritarian CRINC nations led by China and Russia cooperate more, leaving the other Western countries scrambling to preserve what is left of the international liberal order. Europe in particular is feeling the wrath of Donald Trump, so Gabriele's speech comes at a very timely moment. We've hosted a few dissidents at the club over the years, but never one quite like this. So for those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on social media platform X. Our handle is PressClubAust, @PressClubAust, and our hashtag is NPC. Please, everyone welcome Ambassador Visentin to the stage.
Thank you very much. Without this, I'm lost. So thank you very much, Andrew, for your very kind and generous introduction. And I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on here in Canberra, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to the First Nations people present here, and since we are broadcasted, the ones who are at home. So, Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it may come as an eye-opener that today's address title is "The EU as a Power for Prosperity, Security and Democracy." We, EU, are well known in Australia as a vehicle for prosperity. With a market of 450 million, the EU has long been an economic powerhouse. But traditionally, we were not identified as a strong security actor, and certainly not in this part of the world. This was right and wrong at the same time. It was right because the EU was a project built in and for peacetime. And it was also wrong because the EU emerged precisely to relegate war to the past. And it was extraordinarily successful in doing so. Yet, that enduring success today requires a transformational change. But let's take a quick step back. The European Union, when it started 70 years ago, was at its heart a peace project. The European integration originated in 1950 as a project bringing together Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands in the European Community for Steel and Coal. A project of economic integration and interdependence starting with industries like coal and steel that lay at the heart of the defense industry, so that war, which for centuries ravaged the European continent, would be confined to history and become not just unthinkable, but also materially impossible. It was a page of our history that was turned first in Western Europe. Then, with the fall of the Iron Curtain, the wall that divided East from West Europe, the principles of openness that enshrined peace, democracy, and prosperity in one half of the continent were extended to the east as well. And that vision of 75 years ago has now become the European Union of 27 member states we are today. We have built a union founded on peace, prosperity, democracy, and solidarity. A place where everyone is entitled to be who they are, live the life they want, and freely determine their future, just like Australia. Internally, Europe was built on openness, which means liberal democracy, economic integration, political dialogue, reconciliation, and respect for diversities. And those very principles of openness have been at the core of how we have engaged with the rest of the world, including Australia. So as I said, Europe is a peace project, but we stand at a decisive moment in the history of our continent. For 3 years now, war has returned to Europe's doorstep, with Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, which has shattered the European security architecture and trampled on the foundations of international law, starting with sovereignty and territorial integrity. Thousands of Ukrainians fled bombs. Cars lined up towards Ukraine's western borders. And when many of them ran out of fuel, people marched, even for tens of kilometers, towards the European Union. They sought refuge inside our borders because Ukraine was no longer secure, and Europe offered them a place viewed as safe, where individual freedoms and rule prevail. Today, the EU is home to 4.5 million of those fleeing Ukrainians, and we will continue to offer them refuge. This war is a clash between the rule of law and the rule of the gun, between democracy and autocracy, between self-determination and coercion. This is why only 2 weeks into Russia's large-scale invasion, when many feared that Kyiv would fall, Ukraine applied for EU membership. So Ukraine freely chose Europe, and the EU has made its choice. We stand for Ukraine. The EU member states quickly agreed to grant Ukraine the status of candidate country, which in normal circumstances would take years. The EU and like-minded countries worldwide do assist Ukraine because they believe that a lasting peace can only be achieved with the respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and self-determination. Also, European security will only be stable with an independent Ukraine, and Ukraine's fight is at the heart of a much broader fight for freedom, security, and democracy, not only on our continent, but worldwide. This is why Europeans will continue to stand by Ukraine, supporting Kyiv economically and militarily, as well as progressively integrating Ukraine in our broader defense initiatives and programs, and, of course, ultimately, in our Union. Since the start of the war, the EU and its member states have made available close to 230 billion Australian dollars in financial, military, humanitarian, and refugee assistance. Europe, collectively, is the biggest economic and military supporter of Ukraine. And we have not been alone in this effort. Like other like-minded countries, Australia has been standing with Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. standing on the side of democracy and freedom, which is the right side of history, as it has always done since World War I and World War II. And I say to our Australian friends that when you support Ukraine, you also support the EU. And so we do thank you wholeheartedly. Only yesterday, through the night, the Australian night, the Commission President von der Leyen presented the new 18th package of EU sanctions against Russia. And she said, we want peace for Ukraine. Despite weeks of diplomatic attempts, despite President Zelensky's offer of an unconditional ceasefire, Russia continues to bring death and destruction to Ukraine. Russia's goal is not peace. It is to impose the rule of might. Therefore, we are ramping up pressure on Russia because strength is the only language that Russia will understand. Our European message is very clear. This war must end. We need a real ceasefire, and Russia has to come to the negotiating table with a serious proposal. As Russia is up until today not showing willingness to achieve peace, we will step up pressure, including through further robust sanctions. And therefore, we are proposing an 18th package of hard-biting sanctions. And we are targeting mainly two sectors: Russia's energy sector and Russia's banking sector. First, on the energy. Amongst other measures, we propose to lower the oil price cap from $60 to $45 per barrel. Oil exports still represent 1/3 of Russia's government revenues. We need to cut this source of revenue. And the oil price cap is a G7 coalition measure, which will be discussed at the next G7 summit in Canada, where Australia and the EU will be in attendance. In addition, to better enforce the cap, on top of the 342 vessels already listed, we list today an additional 77 vessels that are part of the so-called Russian shadow fleet. And these vessels are a means to evade sanctions. Now, for the banking sector, we are targeting the Russian banking sector by limiting its ability to raise funding and conduct transactions. We, inter alia, propose to transform the existing prohibition to use the SWIFT system into a full transaction ban. The third point is that we propose further export bans in order to deprive the Russian economy of critical technology and industrial goods. We are targeting machinery, metals, plastics, and chemicals. We also restrict the export of dual-use goods and technologies that are used for producing drones, missiles, and other weapon systems. We want to make sure that Russia does not find ways to modernize its weapons. And finally, we want our sanctions to be better applied and respected. That is why we widen the scope of the transaction ban that already exists. And we list Russian and foreign companies providing direct or indirect support to Russia's military and industrial complex. Putin's ability to sustain the war very much depends on the support he receives from third countries. Those who support Russia's war and the effort of conquering Ukraine carry a heavy responsibility. So, with this package, we step up pressure on Russia. And our objective is very clear. We are reiterating the call for a full, unconditional ceasefire of at least 30 days. This pause in hostilities could serve as a vital step toward reducing civilian suffering and allowing space for meaningful talks for genuine peace. So, given that Russia's ambitions are broader than Ukraine, imperial ambitions are broader than Ukraine, Europe now knows that we must be ready for deterrence. The European project, again, was born in and for peacetime. It must now make the transformational change of ensuring material preparedness for its defense. It is precisely because we want to continue to safeguard peace on our continent that we know that bolstering our defense must now move to the core of European integration. And Europe is ready to speed up, ramp up, and scale up defense all at once. Because what is at stake is peace and security, which we have built in 80 years. And we will not let them go quietly into the night. That is why the EU has very recently adopted its Rearm Europe Readiness 2030 package. It has three main goals. First, continue support to Ukraine, which is our first line of defense. Second, filling the capabilities gap, not only for the needs of today, but also for the needs of tomorrow. And third, strengthening the overall EU defense industry. Defense industry is the most important resource for defense as a whole, because in times of war, you need to develop a defense industry close to the front line. An industry that needs to ramp up and produce more and faster. An industry able to develop the capabilities we need. And we made sure a once-in-a-generation surge will support European defense. The purpose of our Rearm Europe plan is to achieve a strong European defense posture, and therefore it has been endowed with 800 billion euros, or 1.4 trillion Australian dollars. This will provide a flood in investment capabilities and readiness, thanks to the financial levers given to our member states, so that they can substantially and rapidly scale up their investments in defense. This spending will ramp up production, strengthen defense industry, and boost innovation, and help us fill urgent capability gaps in areas like air and missile defense, artillery systems, ammunitions and missiles, drones and counter-drone systems, military mobility, AI, quantum, cyber, and electronic warfare, satellites, combat capabilities, and critical infrastructure protection. And the need to invest in our security is ever more urgent. We know that this investment will not come from anywhere else. Times are changing, and Europe is with it. The fact that we are now providing up to 800 billion euros for defense would have been impossible just a few years ago. And the fact that member states are raising their defense spending to historic highs would also have been unthinkable. So we are doing this to put everything into defending peace. But as Europe ramps up to defend itself, it doesn't want to do so alone. On the contrary, we have created scope for cooperation with our like-minded partners worldwide. So our security and defense partnerships, or SDPs for short, allow for the development of tailored and mutually beneficial partnerships. We have a total of 8 SDPs, the last of which we signed with the UK on May 19th, while in the Indo-Pacific we have 2, one with Japan and the second with Korea. And of course, the possibility of an SDP with Australia was mentioned by President von der Leyen with Prime Minister Albanese in Rome, and by High Representative EU's Chief Diplomat Callas with Minister Miles in Singapore. For Europe, these security partnerships are key because European security and security in the Indo-Pacific are intertwined. The war in Ukraine has seen growing military and technological cooperation. And without support for Russia from other countries, the war would have run a different course. Security and defense partnerships constitute the framework and the entry point for partners to cooperate with the defense initiatives the EU has now in store. Whether it is related to maritime security, cyber activities, addressing foreign information manipulation and interference, countering hybrid threats, or crisis management, the EU is willing to deepen cooperation in what interests our partners most. But while details remain to be negotiated and decided on a country-by-country basis, partners with SDPs can join common procurement of defense equipment with the respective benefits for economies of scale. This brings concrete benefits, allows strategic industries to work closer together. So, let me now turn to prosperity. The EU has always remained steadfast in its commitment to peace, partnership, and cooperation, both within our borders and around the world. We believe in the UN Charter, in multilateralism, the rules-based international order, and its global institutions. We uphold fair trade, guided by rules, as the basis for shared prosperity. And as the world's largest provider of development assistance, we are a vital partner to many nations worldwide. And we do continue to stand at the forefront of the fight against climate change, supporting security and prosperity, including in the Indo-Pacific. The EU and its member states have a clear interest in working together and with their partners to build shared resilience globally. Because resilient economies and supply chains generate shared prosperity. Resilient societies face up to climate change and advance the green transition. And resilient governance based on international law and the rules-based international order guarantee this. Climate change can be the biggest disruptive force of all our efforts. The Pacific and Indian island states are the most exposed and vulnerable to climate events. A sustainable green transition is the chief solution to ensure energy security and improve resilience, and effectively fight climate change and mitigate its consequences. Through Global Gateway, the EU's vehicle for cooperation, many projects to support the green transition and sustainable development and connectivity are being implemented throughout the region in cooperation with all of our partners. Of course, prosperity, sustainability, and connectivity are all interlinked with security, because there is no security without development, and there is no development without security. That's clear. And the EU always favors multilateral solutions and regional approaches also when dealing with security. Freedom of navigation and overflight are fundamental principles which underpin regional security and stability, and therefore guarantee that the Indo-Pacific region remains free and open. Now, on our bilateral relations. So the relationship between Australia and the EU is beneficial for the whole region as well. And the level of our bilateral economic partnership is impressive and growing exponentially year after year. The EU represents a bloc of 450 million people with a GDP of 31 trillion Australian dollars. For Australia, the EU is the third largest trading partner after China and Japan, and the second largest source of foreign investment. Last year, our bilateral trade amounted to 160 billion Australian dollars. The principles of openness and cooperation are nowadays being challenged. Nationalism, isolationism, protectionism are on the rise, with tariffs, economic coercion, and unfair trade practices increasingly widespread. As a result, we are well aware of the insecurity linked to excessive economic dependencies. While we will not turn our backs to the openness that has served Europe and the world so well, we are determined to de-risk, meaning reducing dangerous dependencies. De-risking also means deepening and widening economic partnerships with many countries around the world, starting with like-minded ones, which do share our commitment to free and fair trade. In our difficult times, nothing can be any more taken for granted. For decades, free trade has been a driver of global prosperity and has lifted billions out of poverty. Now, global markets are shaken by tariffs. Tariffs are like taxes. They hurt consumers and businesses alike. They affect Wall Street as well as Main Street. So the right answer is more free trade. Therefore, we have to team up and double down on our hallmark policies of open markets based on free and fair trade. In this moment, I can say, it pays off that Europe is reliable and predictable. We already have the largest network of free trade agreements with 76 countries around the world. And since last year, we have concluded a new wave of trade deals, from Mercosur to Mexico to Switzerland. Partners want to deal with us because we are perceived as fair, reliable, and we always play by the rules. And that is the European way of trade. And the partnerships we seek with like-minded partners start, but certainly do not end with trade. A key focus for the EU and Australia is critical minerals, on which we have signed last year a strategic partnership. And as Europe strives to reach net zero by 2050, as the whole world, we need to improve economic competitiveness and build more secure and resilient supply chains, deepening cooperation on critical minerals, which is therefore essential. Recently, just a couple of days ago, the European Commission adopted the first list of new critical raw materials strategic projects, of which over 10% are tied to Australia. And this is really the evidence that our strategic partnership on critical minerals, just signed in May 2024, is already delivering, including through the growing presence and success of Australian companies in Europe. So, add to this our growing collaboration on research and innovation that is built on the bedrock of our shared commitment to freedom of science, freedom of thought, and freedom of opinion, thanks to which our students and professors can study and teach in a framework where excellence and innovation thrive. So all of this that I just said is a very solid starting point for EU and Australia to advance on shared ambitions, both bilaterally and in the multilateral institutions. To deepen ties on security and defense, strengthen cooperation on research and innovation and energy, fight the climate change, and hopefully re-engage on FTA negotiations. But what secures and stabilizes interests and economic partnerships in the long term are common values. In our case, the rule of law, freedom of science, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom of press, democracy and human rights, accountability of governments to opposition and public opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe and Australia are more than markets to each other. We are more than a set of institutions. Our relationship is about more than the economy. It's about prosperity, it's about security, and it's about democracy. And this is the very moment to stand up for our strengths and values. We are transforming our union to protect our democratic values, our freedoms, because we know that those values are under threat. What is being targeted, though, are democracies and open societies not only on the European continent. Yes, and I recall the title of my intervention today. Yes, the EU is a global power for prosperity, security, and democracy. But Europe and Australia cannot control illiberal drifts, changes across the world. Still, we, Europe and Australia, can and must team up to protect our own rules and values and our democracies, which are strong but should never be taken for granted. So, to conclude, democracy, freedom, prosperity, and security are our common treasure. This is what we must defend, and to do so together is the only way to guarantee we will succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can I start perhaps with a threshold sort of question? Democracy, security, prosperity. Who is the biggest threat to that at the moment? Is it Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, or Xi Jinping?
I think the
You'll earn his money here.
it's an interesting race, actually. No, I think that we should not personalize. I think that there is geopolitical tensions which are aiming at revert what the international rules-based order is, regardless of the actors. And I think that we have to team up to defend that. The liberal democracies, which still believe in democracies, in international rules-based order, in rule of law, really have to team up and show that the project of democracies and that representative and liberal democracies are still valid and can still deliver. I think that's what we have to bear in mind.
We have to team up. How do we prevail, though? I mean, in the US, for instance, presidential cycles are 4 years. We'll get a new president in time, but Xi Jinping is dictator for life. Vladimir Putin wins elections with 90+% support. This alliances of, EU, Australia, Canada, Japan, perhaps of Western liberal democracies. I mean, how can we prevail, ensure that we prevail, that world will prevails?
Well, if you look at the numbers, it's really possible. Look at the GDP, look at the number of persons which live in what are still liberal democracies. I think we have the strength and the capacities to stand up for our rights, to defend our systems, and it's just a matter of really teaming up. If we are separate and scattered, we won't be able to protect the systems and the values we stand for. But if we stand together, I think we have enough impact and enough capacities to do so.
Okay. Our first question from the floor, Stephen Jedgetts.
Hi, Stephen.
It's on. I think it is now. Ambassador Stephen Jedgetts from ABC, thank you very much for your thoughtful speech. Can I take you to the proposed EU strategic and security partnership that was first raised on the sidelines of the Pope's inauguration in Rome? Yeah. The assessment of analysts has been that the government's initial response to that proposal was distinctly cool, if not necessarily disinterested. What's your assessment of the government's response so far? And when Representative Callas met with the Deputy Prime Minister in Singapore, did he indicate perhaps more openness towards considering this proposal?
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. That's a very valid question. No, I think that the Prime Minister rightly said that it was very early stage to comment. I suppose there has not been a discussion in Cabinet. That's why there was not an agreed position from the Australian side. But I think that the European proposal was welcomed, also because, as you said, when Minister Miles met High Representative Callas in Singapore, there was a follow-up to that, and it was agreed that informal talks would start from the Australian mission in Brussels with the representatives of the European institutions.
Are you heartened by that development? Do you believe that there's an appetite there in Canberra to at least explore this further?
Yeah, these glasses are full, right?
Very good. Our next question comes from Rhiannon Down.
Rhiannon Down from the Australian newspaper. Thank you for your speech, Ambassador. European farmers have historically opposed expanding access for Australian agricultural products to their market in the face of the threat posed by Donald Trump's tariff agenda. Is the EU more open than it previously was to opening up to more competition in order to promote the principles of free global trade?
Well, it's you have to see a global package. When you do an FTA, it's not just agriculture; it's comprehensive. And it's really, my job here is not to negotiate, unfortunately. It is to create the good conditions for talks to happen and to bring people at the table in the best possible conditions. What I'm witnessing now, there is a revamp in the two sides' interest to sit at the table with a positive attitude and see what could be done.
Thank you. Next question from Phil Curry.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, Ambassador. Can I just ask you on the strategic partnership, two-part question. Could you explain to people who'd be watching this what that would actually involve in practical terms, should it ever be invoked? Would it be Australian troops going to Europe or vice versa? Is it that simple? And secondly, can you envisage that negotiation becoming part of the free trade negotiation, or does the EU see those as two separate things?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. This is very valid because it allows me to clarify a couple of issues, because I read many articles on the Australian press which were not extremely precise. No, this strategic partnership. No, it's my fault that I did not explain well enough. The strategic partnership is not a mutual assistance agreement, and it's not an alliance. It's not a military alliance. It's a partnership for cooperation on defense issues, including industrial things. So there is no scope for an understanding in terms of transfer of troops or mutual help and mutual assistance. Definitely. And no, it's totally separate from the FTA. It's not. It has nothing to do with free trade. It's another aspect. Thank you.
What would the value in that agreement be compared to, the EU doesn't have an army.
No.
We deal bilaterally, particularly with the French, who obviously have some skin in the game in the Indo-Pacific and things like that. We deal through NATO. So I mean, what is to ensure that this isn't sort of a superfluous agreement or something like that? I think there's a bit of confusion around that as well.
True. No, you know, the EU doesn't have an army, but the EU has 27 member states with 27 armies. And these strategic partnerships are negotiated only and if the member states allow the EU to negotiate with a third country. So there is a mandate which is granted by unanimity to the EU to enter into negotiations and finalize a strategic partnership. So I can tell you that when you do a strategic partnership with the EU, you deal with 27 member states and 27 armies. So that's quite a powerful means.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question from Ben Westcott.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank
Hi,
you
Ben.
so much for your speech, Ambassador. I just wanted to ask, press you a little bit on the FTA. You said that there is sort of a move to revamp, go back to negotiations. Can you just sort of explain to us, has the situation changed compared to when the negotiations happened last time to make the agreement more likely? And if so, in what way?
We have probably to separate the fields on which we are looking at, or the prism against which we look at the FTA. Nothing has changed in terms of content. The differences are still there and are still difficult to resolve and to address. What had not been resolved in Osaka is still unresolved. What has changed, of course, is the willingness and the readiness to try to strike a deal. We have seen an incredible change in the geopolitics and in the world trade. And this means that an FTA would allow the EU and Australia to team up and defend free trade, the principles of free trade. So on one side, the geopolitical situation has been, let's say, instrumental to bring us back to to talk after 1.5 years that these talks had been suspended. But the sticky issues remain.
One thing with FTAs is our friend across the Tasman, Christopher Luxon, the Prime Minister there, has talked about somehow bolting on the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, with the EU in some sort of free trade. It's very vague, sort of what it's talked about, you know, but ultimately perhaps it could be a free trade zone or something between the regions. I mean, is there much sort of talk around that as something that's worth pursuing?
Oh, well, yes, we are also extremely happy that just last week, under the Australian presidency, the CPTPP has expressed interest in opening a constant dialogue with the EU, which was not the case till few weeks ago. So we are very happy to see this development.
And what would it mean? I mean, is the ambition there perhaps for a free trade zone between Europe and most of the Pacific?
Too early to say.
Okay, very good. Next question, Tessa Economou.
Thank you very much for your time today. The European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy has been labelled as ambitious but faltering by some security experts. They point to the war in Ukraine and the fact that the Union is made up of all these different countries as limiting the effectiveness. How can the EU make a tangible contribution to regional security? Well, one of the chapters of the EU Indo-Pacific strategy is precisely on defense. And this was the first piece of policy, regional piece of policy, which included a chapter on defense. And we acknowledge this, I mean, the Indo-Pacific theater as the same theater than Europe in terms of geopolitical tensions or fights. So we are very, very serious on investing in defense. I would just like to maybe recall what happened in August up in Darwin, Pitch Black exercise. There was the highest number ever of EU jet fighters participating in Pitch Black, and there was the first ever European
aircraft carrier deployed there. And there's just been an agreement that there will be European aircraft carriers coming to the Indo-Pacific every year. So this year it was an Italian, next year will be UK, and in 2 years' time it will be French. So we are going well beyond the classic port visits of single frigates. Yeah.
So you disagree with the proposition that the war in Ukraine is limiting how much Europe can invest in the region?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question, James Riley.
Thanks, Ambassador. James Riley from Innovation Oz. I wanted to ask you about science and research, and specifically about the Horizon Europe program, a €93 billion program. Horizon Europe obviously encourages international participation, takes partners on. Canada is a partner, as is New Zealand and some of our other peer countries. Australia has kind of rebuffed the notion of joining Horizon Europe, including just 2 years ago under the current government. My question is this: what appetite is there in Europe to encourage more partnerships right now? What would be the cost of entry these days? Has the Australian government initiated any discussions in this direction? And just based on some of the questioning around strategic partnerships and the Ukraine, will Horizon Europe be reconfigured in any way to focus a little more on dual use and defence tech?
Thank you for the question. Really, really fascinating. Horizon Europe is, as you know, maybe I would say a couple of words on that, is the largest publicly funded research program. It has an endowment of 95 billion euros. So it's really a major vehicle for cooperation. It's open to association, not to everybody. It's open to association only to countries with a high scientific potentials, which do abide to democratic principles and allow freedom of science. It's not the whole world. It's just a close club. You mentioned Canada, you mentioned New Zealand, but I would mention as well the UK. UK, after Brexit, the first EU program that the UK wanted to join after Brexit was precisely Horizon Europe. That tells a lot. We are negotiating with Japan, and we have just finalized negotiations and signed off with South Korea. So to tell you, there is a real important network of industrialized and countries which do see clear advantages in joining Horizon Europe. It was the previous government which had not shown interest. Now we have to see again. We are at very early stages, but I'm seeing encouraging signals, still informal, of a potential renewed interest in finding out the conditions under which Australia might associate to Horizon.
Sorry, can I just direct you to that last part of the question? Given the nature of the partners that you've signed, is there a reconfiguring towards defence dual-use tech?
For the time being, not, because the research areas of Horizon are decided, and then are when the program is established, they can be reviewed, but for the time being, not. It's still what it is. When you are associated, you have also a word in terms of the programs and the priorities of research. Thank you.
Next question is from Tom McElroy, but before he gets his words out, there'd be a good opportunity to acknowledge Tom as the winner of this year's EU Qantas Journalist of the Year prize. He'll be off to Europe I guess in a few weeks' time, perhaps, and we'll be writing about it, and we'll be able to read about what he finds on The Guardian. So congratulations,
Thanks,
Tom.
Andy.
Well done. And I suppose we cannot say on which airlines you were flying because you were delayed, right?
My apologies for the delay, Mr. Ambassador.
Right. Cool.
My apologies. It wasn't a airline relevant to today's event, I promise.
Good.
Thank you for taking our questions. Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Ambassador, you said that the fundamentals of the negotiations around the free trade agreement were not changed from previous points, but the geopolitical situation was different. Is it possible that the illiberal drift that you describe in the geopolitical situation of the world could have a lasting legacy in building more free trade agreements? Is it possible that Donald Trump is really a major factor in the strong partnership that you see between Europe and Australia on trade?
Again, I don't want to personalize, but I think that the global trends which are posing threats to the world wealth, prosperity, and the possibility for trade to grow play a role in this. So definitely, as I said, the liberal democracies, or the ones who believe in free and fair trade based on rules, are more and more deciding to team up amongst themselves, yes.
And you mentioned that you were a glass half full person. Are you at all concerned that it could be more than a drift, that it could be more lasting than that, given the direction of travel in geopolitics?
I think that trends are there to be reinforced or to be cancelled. Let's see what happens in the next years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How concerning is the prospect of an illiberal drift within the EU? I mean, we often talk about Hungary as sort of the problem child of the EU. I know you won't use those words, given that they're one of 27 valued members. But I mean, we sort of saw, the Polish elections the other week. Romania obviously had a very contested election a couple of months ago. Other countries as well. I mean, there is not a sort of degree of 100% unity among the EU on these sorts of issues, is there?
Well, the democratic values and principles apply to elections, and every country, of course, elects the government of the president it wants. And we, as EU, welcome any kind of leadership which is elected, as long as it's elected according to democratic principles and free and fair elections. What I wanted to bring your attention to is, regardless of this, of course, factual rise of some fringes, no European institutions has not been able to work. We are talking about the 18th package of sanctions, for example. There has been 17 packages of sanctions adopted by unanimity by all of our countries. So the European Parliament is not a hung parliament. It works pretty well. So, of course, we have to bear in mind that there are some concerns in the European populations and in the European member states which need to be addressed. And mind you, in democracies, voters are always right. It's the kind of answers that the politicians give, which have to adapt and respond to the expectations of the citizens.
Thank you. Next question from Anna Henderson.
Thank you for your address. Hello. We've had news today from Australia and a number of other countries that they've jointly imposed sanctions on 2 Israeli ministers. I wanted to get your view or your thoughts on, there's a sort of big, wide viewing of opinion in Australia from those who think that this is the wrong approach to a democratic nation, to those who think this is nowhere near enough and are calling for direct sanctions on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So I wanted to get your views on what the EU makes of this development, and whether or not you think that this conference later this month in New York that the French President Emmanuel Macron and the Saudi Arabians are pursuing is an important moment in the quest for Palestinian statehood.
First of all, a couple of general remarks. Any effort leading to a relief of the human suffering of the Palestinian population is welcome. The EU position is that there should be the humanitarian aid should be allowed in, and the help to overcome the current dire situation of the Palestinian population has to be solved. This is why our High Representative has called for an immediate opening of the borders to humanitarian help so that it could reach Gaza. And there has been a number of member states which have actually formalized their strong position against the Israeli policy and have asked for measures to be taken. But this is still to be taken up according to the European voting rights and in the real bodies. But there are some member states who have really asked for taking strong actions against, yes.
And do you have a view on the question of Palestinian statehood, which for some European nations may be decided this month?
Well, our position has always been through the years and continues to be that there must be the only viable solution, long-term, lasting solution, is the two-state solution. This is what we continue to work on and to insist about. And we have to consider the absolute right of Israel not only to exist but to defend itself from terrorism, but we also have to guarantee a dignified life to the Palestinians. Of course, condemning any kind of terrorist attack and what the horrific acts of October the 7th. But we see that the only long-lasting solution still is the two-state solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question from Caitlin Rintle.
Thank you for your address today. On the free trade agreement, does Australia's AUKUS deal and the submarine rift with France still play into the EU calculations? And given we still have those roadblocks, do you think it's realistic that we could see a deal in this second-term Labor government?
I think that AUKUS is a past page. I mean, it's years ago. There has been a change in the bilateral relation, a dramatic change in the bilateral relations, and it's not for me to comment on a member state's relation with a third state. But what I could witness from the European side, there's been a clear change in what were the bilateral relations with France, with the EU member states years ago, and what it is now. There have been talks, there have been solutions also to the discrepancies and to the differing views that were present at the time. So I think that the AUKUS page has been turned. As far as the European Union is concerned, there was also a declaration for the EU Council on AUKUS, but that's past history. I think this has nothing to do with the FTA and the position of France on that. No.
Yep. And do you believe that we could see a deal over the next 3 years?
Over the next 3 years?
Or will it continue to drag out because of those roadblocks?
Well, I think that what is happening now is that we have started talking again, and there have been level meetings at the political level and also at the head negotiators level. So we will see. I cannot predict. I really cannot predict. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question from Joseph Albrecht-Palmer.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your speech. My second country, Poland, was warning for years about the threat of the Kremlin under Vladimir Putin, along with Baltic states as well. But those warnings went unheeded for a long time. And we, of course, saw the invasion in Ukraine. I can't help but see parallels between the warnings that were given about Russia and warnings about China. Is China Australia's Russia? And is Canberra being complacent like Brussels was?
I cannot possibly comment on the choice that the Australian government does on its defence policies. What I can say is that there is, I would say, a clear link between the Chinese and the Russian visions of what the new international rules-based order should be. And we have seen maybe some worrying sign of military scaling up of China. But from here to to comment on national domestic policies, I would not go that far.
And sorry, and just to follow up in terms of what Europe could do in the event of a significant escalation in the Indo-Pacific, what would that look like? What kind of material action would that look like?
I definitely think, as I said before, that the two theaters are completely intertwined. And so the security for Europe depends also on what is happening in Indo-Pacific and vice versa. I just wanted to raise a point on why I mentioned so much the Indo-Pacific and why the EU is so interested in the Indo-Pacific. You know, 40% of the global trade towards the EU comes from the Indo-Pacific. Therefore, we do have a vital interest that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open. It's a matter of our wealth and our prosperity. So, of course, we have to be aware of what a disruption of the status quo would mean for us as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question from Ellie Campbell from the Canberra Times.
Thank you. My question relates to the proposed security partnership. You've said a formal agreement between the EU and Australia would not be a military alliance, but would be an industry alliance. Are you concerned that Australia's very large spending commitments under the AUKUS Pact would crowd its capacity to support Europe's defence industry? And do you think that Australia should follow other European nations and increase its spending on defence?
It's really up for the national authorities and your treasurer to decide where to put your defence money. These strategic partnerships again is bespoke, is negotiated on a case-by-case, country per country. So once we will get there, we will decide what to do together. So it's a matter of the two sides agreeing what to do.
And on defence spending?
Again, it's a total national decision on how to go ahead on that.
Thank you. And next question, and our final question for the day, is from Nick Stewart.
Following Andrew Tillett's question, you're a collection of 27 marvellous democracies, some of which are like Hungary, not quite so certain about the way they feel about Russia and what you said earlier. Poland, the recent election showed a dramatic turnaround from earlier stages. France is going to an election next year. There's the possibility that we will have a complete change of government. Obviously, Macron won't be standing again. How trusted and valued a partner will the EU be for Australia in 10 years' time?
Well, I think that we remain what we are now. I mean, the EU has a set of institutions, has a set of rule of law, has even a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which guarantee that the EU system remains democratic. As you know, there are rules and provisions that allow the European institutions to check whether or not member states do comply with the European law and with the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. So I'm not prejudging anything, but just to tell you that there are checks and balances as well that would allow the EU to control that the whole of its democratic values are respected and upheld by its member states.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Please, everyone.